Welcome back to
Tommy's house.
Very exciting episode where we are going to unpack and analyze my recent appearances on the Candace Owens show, and you're going to react to it. Blind react.
Yeah, I haven't told you what I thought yet. So you're going to see a genuine, sincere emotion on Ami's face.
Okay.
When I destroy him.
Is that so hard to do for me? I'm genuine. You don't think so?
We'll get into it. We're going to get into it.
Before we get into this episode, which will be spicy, I'd like to thank our sponsors over at Twillery, an incredible apparel brand that makes, honestly, the best stuff. I got to tell you, I'm wearing a blazer of theirs right now, Michael. Twillery, crooked Twillery. We love Twillery. But I have to tell you, I'm not joking and I'm not lying when I say this. I walk around in this blazer, full air suit blazer, the air suit they have, and I get comments constantly.
Yeah.
People are like, oh my God, I love this suit. What is this? It is flexible. You can wear it in the summer. Like, look, you can like see through it. You can throw it in the wash. You put it on. It moves with you. It's dad proof. You can squat in it in the pants. It's wild. The blazer's incredible. I stand by this clothing brand. They make some of the best stuff. It's probably the best blazer and suit I've ever owned.
The joggers are good.
Yeah.
The shirts are good. But when you put on the blazer, you realize why this company has to exist. The blazer is a special piece.
Right.
It's special.
It is. And fix your lapel. There we go.
Oh my God.
I'm just saying, like, I can sleep in this.
It's great.
It's
Friday nights I do sleep in it sometimes.
It feels like they took the N1 mesh shorts that we wore in the 90s and made suits out of them.
Yeah. Very breathable, very comfortable. They look good. I always get compliments when I wear them. Super high recommend. What's the code to get $18 off $139 or more?
AH18?
AH18. If your first order of $139 or more, get $18 off AH18. Please support the show. Check it out. Check out these blazers. Link in the show notes.
People will stop me in conversations right in the middle just to say, by the way, I love this suit. Where'd you get it? I was talking to Constantine of Trigonometry. And in the middle of meeting this guy, he was like, I love this. Where did you get this? They just stop and start hopping a feel.
And he knows blazers.
He knows blazers.
Got that nice purple one?
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's Twillery, incredible company, and they are proud sponsors of the Ami's House podcast, and we are happy to partner with them because we wear their stuff.
Thank you, Twillery.
Twillery. Go pick your Twillery apparel up now using the promo code AH18. All right, we're back here at Ami's House to discuss my recent appearances on the Candace Owens show. We did a reaction video to my debate with Dave Smith, which you could find on Patreon, the full unpacked episode, if you go over to our Patreon page. That episode was actually split into two parts, which we can talk about how that all came together.
Right.
And what has been released over the weekend on Friday was a one-on-one, me talking to Candace, as a follow-up really to our first conversation that I had back in November.
Right, so it all happened. That was all one afternoon where you talked to Dave Smith and then Candace.
Yes, the backstory is
but she released it as two.
Yeah. The way it all came together was, I did feel sort of compelled after having I think, productive, constructive conversation the first time, which I think was an important conversation in the days after October 7th when things were starting to go awry between her and the Jewish community and in commenting on Israel and stuff. We actually did have a productive conversation, which was prompted by initially a tweet that I had tweeted at her where she retweeted the Queen of Jordan. People know the story a little bit who've been following, and I called her out pretty firmly on Twitter. And to her credit, she reached out to me and invited me on the show to discuss it, and she put out the full unedited episode in its entirety, a full conversation, no messing around, and I appreciated that. I thought that was good of her to do that, and to this day, even since then, as things sort of seem to have gotten worse and deteriorated, I still maintain that when we hear things as a community that are objectionable and that we disagree with, there's sort of been two approaches, or really one approach that's been had pretty much by the Jewish community, which is kind of to go internal and we can write hit pieces, you can write articles, you can make videos that call people out or tweet and call people out. And I'm like, in my head, maybe there's a different way. Like, what happens if you actually have the conversation head on and listen to people and try to take things in good faith and actually address the conversation and listen. And what would happen then? Because I tried that with the first conversation, and it seemed better. It seemed to go in a better direction. It seemed to arrive at a better place than us just self-congratulating ourselves. And I always kept thinking about our episode with Rabbi Wolpe, where he said, today, unfortunately, the term anti-Semitism has very little cultural power. And remember, we asked him, how do you keep this issue alive and well so people are aware of the rise in it without it becoming a tiresome, boring term that people just go, ugh, what, anti-Semitism again? And it's a very scary thing when people just turn a blind eye to it. And he said pretty astutely that, and pretty correctly, that we reserve the term for people who really hate Jews. Like, reserve the term. Don't call everything anti-Semitic. And just like in the pre-October 7th world, or in the days of BLM, we were critical of calling everything racist. And I understood that, and I agree with that, generally speaking. Now, as far as with Candace Owens and talking to her, I don't want people to confuse civility with approval. I'm not condoning any remarks or things that she's made. Quite the contrary. I took her to task to challenge her on those things, especially since our first conversation. It seemed like things were getting worse, and the pattern was getting worse. And that prompted me to say, that conversation exists, and I felt like maybe it's time for a round 2. Check in. See where your head is at. See what's going on. And I went into it with the approach of really trying to not presume what's going on internally, because a lot of the times I've saw these conversations that just devolved when she would have other guests on, and what they would do is they'd call her something, a label. You are this. This is what you are inside. And that would just immediately trigger her defenses. And she's like, no, I'm not. This is not what I feel about Jewish people. That's what she would say. And I tried to separate how one feels internally, how she felt internally and claims to feel internally towards our community and towards Jewish people. That's fine. And I can take that in good faith, but I'm judging the actions externally. So that way we can talk about specific behaviors, tweets, comments, commentary, episodes that are problematic, and that whether she knows it or not, or is aware of it or not, is feeding into a climate of anti-Semitism that emboldens people who really do hate Jews and do have nefarious intentions. And I was trying to help connect those dots. And that was sort of my outlook going in, to sort of button up and wrap up what was happening and maybe clean up some of the mess of conversations she had that didn't go well. And I maintain that if you show up, act like a mensch, be civil, have a conversation in good faith, in the spirit of the marketplace of ideas, to try to understand people and see where they're at. It doesn't mean I approve of anything that's been said, but I don't think it does harm. I don't think it does harm, and I'm conscious of also not being tokenized and used for the optics of, oh, see, I got a Jewish guy onto us, and therefore that means something, other than this is a conversation to evaluate. And yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how it went. That was my outlook going in. But we ended up also having the Palestine debate beforehand, which was also just timing-wise. It made things, it took a lot of energy to do both. But I was aware that having the Israel-Palestine debate first, without this big elephant in the room of like, I also want to address Candace head-on, one-on-one, and talk about these issues. So that was also on my mind throughout the Dave Smith debate of like, okay, like we also have these other things I want to clarify and understand. So what's going on with you and internally? But anyway.
I mean, I commend it. I'm not a fan of Candace Owens. I'm probably even, I have stronger feelings against her than even just not being a fan.
Not a fan of me either, but you.
Not a fan of myself sometimes. Yeah. But I don't think she's beyond the pale of someone you can have a conversation with. Like, I mean, who would be? I don't know. Maybe, I don't know who. Nick Fuentes,
Farrakhan, Jake Shields, the people on Twitter who are saying Jews are parasites, who are just like so unapologetically, and that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing all these people emboldened by this commentary. So there's the people who are kind of feeding into it, and buying propaganda, and there are people who are like unapologetically Jew hating.
Right.
And if we call everybody the same thing, it kind of takes away. It's low resolution because it takes away from highlighting the people who, like Rabbi Wolpe said, prioritize those who really are out there hating Jews. And I don't want to name names because I don't want to, but they're all over Twitter and they're really, they're gleeful and proud about it now.
The real value, I think, in what you did wasn't necessarily taking her down. Or like also like what were you expecting? You're gonna get her on her own show to admit she's anti-Semitic? Like that's not gonna happen. I think
No. And
right.
I made a distinction between acknowledging how she identifies internally as what her feelings are towards Jews, and that she has relationships with Jews. And I'm saying we're just talking about behavior and actions you're engaging in that you may or may not realize are doing it. And whether people claim you do realize it or not is making a presumption.
But let me finish. So you're not going on there to like take her down or destroy her or even get her to admit that she's wrong, because she's probably not going to do that. But I think what you did do is you got on the record, you got her to clarify and to speak for long enough that she can't necessarily hide all the small ways in which she is feeding into anti-Semitism. And so I think the value of that conversation was there's now sort of a record of that on the internet. And if someone wants to go back and see her thoughts on whether or not she's anti-Semitic, they can go back and watch that conversation.
You think our conversation is more clarifying and crystallizing than others? In
I
what sense?
I do. I think in the way she kept referring to Jews as you guys, in the way in which she didn't really understand the difference between the Jewish community and the Black community. She kept comparing them as if like Blacks and Jews are the same. So if you can say something about Blacks, the Black community, you can also say it about the Jews, which is just sort of inaccurate. They're not
right, but that's okay. But that highlights to me where the confusion is about this issue.
That's what I'm saying. But I think you got her talking enough where if someone wants to really pay attention and make their own judgment about whether or not she's anti-Semitic, they can watch that conversation and do that. And I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, and I honestly, like, I'm not there to try to get her to do anything. It's more like I'm genuinely, it's confusing here what's going on, because if I didn't have any real exposure or we didn't engage one-on-one to talk about this, like, I'd obviously draw the same conclusions that everybody else does. But the thing that's changed my perspective a little is in engaging with her, it seems like it comes from a place of a lack of awareness and ignorance to anti-Semitism and its history, and ignorance to the Jewish community's experience, and ignorance to issues about Israel, which she's admitted to. Like, I don't know about these things, and also an apathy towards it. Like, I don't really care. And the only problem with that is then why do you keep commenting on it if you don't care? But the other thing is, I think she was telling me in this conversation that just like I went after, I think in the far right corners of the internet now, you're seeing, like, in the free speech absolutist sort of culture of like, okay, there are areas once upon a time we couldn't talk about, and that was in BLM, racism with regard to Black people and communities in that category that were protected, and we couldn't talk about them, and everything was deemed racist. And I was on board with that at the time, and I still maintain that. And in this case, they're seeing the Jewish community. That's the area where we need to be fragile and we can't discuss. So I'm going to discuss it to prove that point. Whether that comes from a place of malice or purely from a temperamental place of, I'm going to discuss the things you're not supposed to discuss. I still think it's the latter. And based on what she told me in the episode, I still think there's a part of her that is driven by that temperamentally.
She said something very revealing. She said she finds it boring that you can't talk about Jews. Which I think is all you need to know about her. Like, she said it herself. Like, she wants
that you can't.
Yeah, she said it's boring to not talk about the Jews. To have something to say about Jews, but not say it.
No, that's not what she said though. She said it's boring to be constantly labeled anti-Semitic for talking about these issues. That's a boring.
Is that what? That's not what I remember hearing.
Oh, she didn't say it's boring to not talk about it. She just said this accusation. You're anti-Semitic. It's boring. I'm bored of it. It has no cultural power because you keep overusing it.
Maybe
in the way that just like I was self-critical, she was like I was critical of my own quote-unquote community, and everybody, all the Jewish people love that, the Jewish conservatives. Now I can't talk about the Jewish community. But there are problems with that because we can unpack, and it was hard to unpack in real time. But like I was trying to say, it's not like Jewish. It's funny because from where we're looking at it, like, you can say anything about Jews and get away with it. And she's saying you can't say anything about Jews. They're protected class.
That was an interesting
And there was
point.
an interesting point. I pointed out we're looking at two different screens here, and the Kanye example was an interesting example of that because from her perspective, he was destroyed and canceled for saying that.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, he wasn't. I mean, he came out with an album and it went to #1. Isn't that concerning that he had all this support and he had all these like people praising him for speaking truth? And I think that was a moment of like kind of understanding where that's coming from. It got to a place like where I think I just to rewind a bit, it got to a place where I think there was more understanding, which we could talk about how things ended.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting thing why someone would draw those wrong parallels and conclusions. Now, what are the differences? And I think part of it is
between the black community and the
yeah.
Jewish
This gets
community?
like interesting. This is like dicey
It's-
territory, but like
But it's interesting because I don't think she makes that distinction.
yeah, because it's like
it's
why can't I talk?
important.
I talked about this
It's
community. Why
important.
can't I talk
Yeah,
about that
it's an
community?
important thing.
But
to-
it's an interesting. If that's what's really driving it, then maybe it's less of pure hatred and more pure like can't say that. Well, now I have to say that because like I'm a temperamentally, she's like that's my personality. I go for the things that you really can't say, and I'm lured and tempted to do that under the name of in the name of free speech and what I can express. And when I get a reaction like this, no, you can't talk about this. Then she's arriving at that conclusion. Whether there's other things going on remains to be seen. But from our conversation, that's what I was taking away from that. This comes from a not as much an ideological place, but much more of a temperamental. It doesn't excuse the remarks
Yeah.
as being acceptable,
Yeah.
but I guess I tried to point out that like she thought I was the one kind of being woke and snowflakey, and I thought she was the one being woke and snowflakey because she was generalizing based on the actions of like certain nefarious Jews that she had, certain Jews she had bad negative interaction with. She's like, okay, and then getting into like generalizing language about, I guess there's Jewish gangs, I guess there's this, and it wasn't about Jewish gangs in the early days of immigrants here. She was using it in more of a different way, and I was trying to call that out. And that's exactly what she criticized BLM for doing. White cop kills black man. There must be a systemic problem. Must be all white people are systemically racist and white supremacists oppressing the black community. I'm like, so you didn't do that in that scenario, but you're doing it here. So it seems like you're using tribal language, collectivist language to describe what's going on here with the Jews in general. But then I didn't want to also let the conversation derail into like debating conspiracies and going through the specifics of trying to understand specific tweets. So when we talked about the Kanye thing, which was like unapologetic, I felt like that was more of a clarifying moment to like really understand what I'm talking about in like that this isn't just a misperception. He didn't say some Jewish people, he said Jewish people, and that seemed like a low-hanging fruit place. But once we got past that, I'll just say like I think it got to a place where if you evaluate the conversation and by the end when we're talking, like I think there was more sympathy than she's granted anyone else for like what Jews are experiencing. And I'm like, I'm just trying to call your attention to that. I'm not trying to get you arrested for speech. There's a difference between legal consequences and any consequences.
Yeah.
Challenging you on this is kind of what you ask for. We want to be taken to task on this.
Yeah.
It's not that we want to be held to a higher standard, just the same standard. And I was feeling like, I was conveying
It's a
that,
good line.
Yeah. And so by the end, hearing what it's like for our community, what it's like to be grandchild of Holocaust survivors, what my parents lived with, and how recent that trauma was, I think that was received in the conversation.
I think
so.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think.
tell
I
me.
mean, yeah. You asked me how I think you did. I don't think you won. And I think if you really wanted to win that, you should have come with like one point you really wanted to hammer home and come with like receipts, like you said, like quotes and have been really prepared on exactly what you said and been able to draw examples from different episodes. And I think she actually did a pretty good job defending herself, honestly. But I think what you did succeed in is drawing her out and getting her to explain herself in a way that anyone who cares to see it can see what she's all about. And I think that's really awesome, and that's like commendable. And that's the point, I think, of these conversations. And like when you ignore them and you refuse to have them and you isolate yourself, you don't really get to know what these people are thinking or how they really feel.
Right.
And
I'll add to that. If you come into these conversations with receipts, with an agenda, it's not a conversation.
Okay.
You are not coming. If I'm coming in to win, to destroy, to own, then let's be honest. Like one of the hardest things about these conversations that are difficult to have is you want to be prepared, but you don't want to be performative. You don't want to just say, I wanted to get certain things out that I wanted her to hear and I wanted to have this conversation. But if you come with receipts and those kind of things and you overplay that and approach it that way, you might win to the community that's already rooting for you, but you're not really winning. Winning is really if both people understand each other a little bit better by the end than when they started. So in that sense, I think both her and I felt like it was a win in that we understood each other slightly a little bit better by the end.
But it's also it's. I mean, yes, I think. I mean,
for her
I
to say
think
at the end about, you know,
that's what makes you special. I think that's why she wants you on the show, and like that's a strength you have that I'm not sure if anyone else who's going on doing the rounds now has, which is really, you need to protect that.
Yeah.
But by the same token, I don't think she came into it willing to give an inch on hers. I don't think she was willing to admit in any way, okay, maybe I could do better in that way. Okay, maybe I don't quite understand that.
If you watch the episode a second time, by the end, the whole tone kind of changes as we sort of sat into it a little bit. And she was saying, yeah, I do. I hear that. I hear that.
But then she ends it with saying, you're so reasonable.
Yeah.
And like it sounded again, she went back to like I thought it was a very condescending tone and a very like generalizing, like there are reasonable Jews and unreasonable Jews, and you're one of the reasonable ones on me, and I appreciate that.
I didn't take it that way. I think it's
that's how I felt when I heard it.
I think it was like, I'm not here to attack you. We're here to talk. I'm not here to win. And I'm not here to own.
Yeah, I felt,
I know you don't like the word reasonable or sensible. Said I was sensible.
Yeah.
And
is that the word she used? Sensible?
Yeah, but think about the experience she's had so far.
You know what?
Publicly.
I understand it because I would say that about crazy left-wingers or right-wingers who I don't think are sensible. So I understand where she's coming from, but I don't think she like, I still don't think she.
But you're reading into that a little bit.
I'm just saying how I felt as a Jew. That's just how I felt as a Jew watching. I mean, I still don't think anyone, including you, anybody has done a good job of explaining to sort of this newly minted anti-Zionist what exactly is going on that's troublesome to us. And I think, I mean, I'm working on writing stuff. Like I'm working on trying to articulate it. Yeah. Because I don't think anyone.
Douglas Murray's been good about it.
Douglas Murray's been good. Yeah, he's been pretty good and pretty effective. Yeah. True. But he's not Jewish. I don't know. I mean, which
maybe that makes him more of an authority, easier to like. So it's not coming from a personal bias.
Yeah, true. But I also think it's.
He just sat down with Ben Shapiro yesterday, and they unpacked it, and he said some interesting.
He's really good at it. But maybe like,
could we really survive without Israel? Could we really, if Israel fell? He said something very dark. He said like 15 million of any population could die out, and it would be tragic, be terrible. 15 million Christians could be killed. One could imagine it. 15 million Muslims, and it would be terrible. But if 15 million Jews were killed, that would be it.
That's great.
That would be it. Just to illustrate how fragile this is.
But what? Why?
I'm going to do the rest of this talk as Douglas Murray.
There's interesting.
To articulate.
Jews are having trouble doing it themselves, though.
Yeah,
you know,
articulating.
Why can't it? Why hasn't a Jew been able to do it as well as Douglas Murray? It's interesting. You know.
Yeah. I think people confuse a lot of things in these conversations with like they're too close to the issue because we care personally, and like your personal connection to something doesn't necessarily matter to other people.
And oddly enough,
when she brought up her St. Thomas connection at the end, did you watch that? And I said, okay, so what if St. Thomas was attacked? And she maintained, I would still, you know, the whole thing that I don't quite fully buy is that this is all just about foreign aid to Israel. Yeah. Is this all just about foreign aid? Because America gives foreign aid to a lot of people. So like, is this all just packed in foreign aid? And she's trying to make the case like, we have problems here at home. I don't want to be entangled with other things. But by the end of the conversation, it's like, that's really what this is about. Like, if you notice at the end of our conversation, I don't think she's said this with other people, but at the end of our conversation, she says, I want Israel to take care of what it needs to take care of. Obviously, Hamas is awful and people support them. It's awful. Obviously, Israel shouldn't be dismantled. That's crazy. If this happened to Jews in America, like America, I'd have a different reaction to it because it's American. Okay. And you could say, I didn't like the way that's presented, but like, that's different. Than the tone that I think I've been hearing until now, or at least to get to a point where that could be elaborated on as, I think Israel should be able to do what it wants to do. Just, I don't want American involvement, which is sort of saying, I'm just isolationist, and we have too many foreign entanglements, and there's PTSD from Iraq and all this wasted stuff. We got to fix problems here at home. Let Israel do what it has to do. If that had been what she'd say from the very beginning about Israel, and that's it, like, I think there'd be a very different reaction from her colleagues, from the community, if that was the tone. Yeah. And for us to arrive in that tone, I felt good about that.
I think when you brought up your grandparents, that your parents didn't have grandparents, and that none of their friends had grandparents, the tone of the whole conversation shifted. And you could see she softened up. She actually leaned back and changed her whole posture. Yeah. And like, I think when you made it personal and you explained like this isn't a talking point for me. This isn't like a fun debate I'm doing for views. This like is my family.
Yeah.
I think it opened it up in a healthy way.
I agree. I felt that too in the moment where it was like we're appealing to like each other's common humanity here and not trying to like score a win or an own. Like I'm not telling you what to say, and I'm not trying to control your speech. You have the right to say whatever you want.
Right.
All I'm saying is you can make a true statement or say something that's technically true, but like just understand the context of the world that you're speaking in.
Right.
And if we lived in the KKK South, in which black people were being lynched daily, weekly, and I decided to make a show that profiled all the nefarious black individuals who were criminals and did things wrong, even if they were technically true, but I'm feeding a base of people that's red meat for them to continue to hate African Americans and commit violence against them and harm and wish them harm. If I continue to do that, like I may want to give a second thought. If I, in fact, in my heart, don't have any ill will towards black people, don't want things to happen to them, then like, you know, I'm just, I may give that a second thought or give it pause to consider that. It's, you know, it's not a compromise on your legal free speech to express yourself. You know?
If you look at the comments on the video,
oh boy,
I mean, it's that's all you need to see, really.
Yeah. Now, granted, is everyone responsible for whatever comments on their video? No, but when you see that, you're just like, I don't know. There was just a clear difference between our first conversation on the Daily Wire and then now, and you're just seeing this like just cesspool of hate for me. And I knew we said in the episode, Ami's going to get killed in the comments, but I appreciate that he's coming on here. He knows that. But killed in the comments is different than
it's very different.
Demonic Jew bastard trying to control you. You know, all this, and also presuming all this crap that's in my head as if I'm some propagandist who was served in the IDF and works for BB. Like I find that kind of funny.
Yeah. To her credit, I thought she had one really good line, which was, "We have to be able to admit when Jews do bad things." Being able to approach a conversation in that way, also of like, where do we see eye to eye? Which I think you do really well politically with that. Of like, we agree not to identify people by groups. But then you seem to go that way.
Right.
And like, why is that, Candace?
And I said there are certainly like individual Jews who've done bad things. I have this weird thing about it. Like, why should Jews have to claim or defend or condemn a bad Jew? You know what I mean? And then it gets back to the whole like, you know, the Muslim community used to say, why do we have to defend the actions of a terrorist or whatever? And it's like, I mean, the difference I can see in that is that when Bernie Madoff does what he does or Jeffrey Epstein does what he does, he's not being animated by Judaism to do those things. And it's not like Jewish ideas are what he's using as an excuse to do that.
And by the way, Jewish groups do condemn him and take his names off diplomas and schools.
Of course.
And
I said that like we are self-critical, we're reflective, we call people out. Like, so it does happen.
Yeah.
And I said having blind tribal allegiance to anyone just because of that is not a healthy thing. It's not a good thing. So we agreed. We got to a point of agreement.
But
on that.
I also, when she asked you that, I was like, ugh, what are you gonna say to that on me? Like, it seems like a trap.
Which question? Have Jewish people done bad things?
Yeah. Has any Jew ever done a bad thing? It didn't seem like it was coming from like a kind
She was
place.
testing my tribal allegiance.
Yeah.
Like if I can't say that, then am I really being objective here? That's the question. But the real thing is, Jewish, like I don't say the Jews or Jewish as a people done bad things. Jewish individuals, I said, have certainly done bad things. There's nothing I'm compromising in my values set to admit that.
Right. Well, so what Harry says is like the people who are doing those bad things in the context you're talking about, very oftentimes are extremely disconnected from their Judaism.
Right.
They don't have any relationship to like our heritage or tradition or rituals.
Yeah.
And like, I wonder what you would say to that type of thing. Like,
well, she did say that. She said to me, "You're not in the Jewish gang, so why do you care?" That kind of thing. And I'm like, it's the anti-Semites out there who are not making those distinctions, not me.
Well, back to the snowflake comment. Like, she was like, Jewish people are being snowflakes, and I wanted you to be like, it's not being snowflakes when people are actually trying to kill you.
Yeah,
it's being a snowflake when no one's trying to kill you, but you're afraid that everyone's trying to kill you.
I didn't get into that, but that to me is a fundamental difference between what was going on during the BLM movement versus what's going on in the Jewish community post October 7th. Now, I will say, post October 7th, I have gotten more sensitive to the idea of when people talk about groups generally, as we do. Well, in the black community, this and that, especially if you're not from that community. Like, I can see how that can be perceived and processed by those communities.
You can see that better now.
I can see that better now.
Yeah, me too.
I can. And I'm like, I get why it feels gross when even conservatives have talked about things so loosely. But at the end of the day, if you look at data and statistics and stuff, a lot of the claims that BLM were making about black people being systematically killed by white cops in droves were just not borne out by reality. And Sam Harris unpacked this. Like, sure, there are bad cops. Sure, there's isolated incidences. But for the most part, and Coleman Hughes talked about, in 2018, the amount of black individuals who were killed by white cops was 18 people.
But by the way, you're not getting on your show and talking about that for hours and hours and hours.
Right.
Because you understand the sensitivities.
But also, but at the end of the day, since October 7th especially, like, the stats affirm our concerns about instances of rising hate crimes towards Jewish people, mobs in the street cheering for October 7th. So we're seeing a reality. As far as what she was combating and speaking out against during BLM, that this is not true, it's exaggerated, it's causing a climate of victimhood. I'm just saying, I don't know how much of a climate of victimhood it is now versus a reality of what's happening.
It's inconsistent.
And there was a massive terrorist attack against Jews on Israel because they were Jews and people who supported it. So we're just reacting to that.
It's inconsistent for her to be like, I examine the reality of victimhood, and when there's no victimhood there, I'm going to call it out.
Yeah.
And then to not say when there is real victimhood there, I'm not going to call it out.
Well, that's what I said to her. Like, it's true that to call out racism or anti-Semitism, any form of bigotry where it doesn't exist is not productive. But when we do see it, it's not. It doesn't come at odds with your values to be consistent to say, well, in certain cases, yes, in certain cases, no. Yeah. Now, I don't want to get into any kind of trouble here with people who will say what I'm saying is insensitive. The truth is, like, it'd be interesting to talk to somebody. I remember during the whole like BLM and George Floyd stuff, I did speak to different people about what it feels like in this climate to be out and the fear that you have of the police when you're pulled over. And I don't know what that's like. Right. So people have anecdotal stories and experience. And it's interesting when you look at things through that lens and how it feels. Adam Carolla had such an interesting thing he said recently. He's like, look, I was buying a house in California. I was in a neighborhood, and I had a neighbor who was just an asshole. Is that a good Adam? It's
okay.
Close.
It's okay. It's close.
Listen, it was this crazy neighborhood, okay, and I just had a neighbor who was an asshole, okay? She was just awful, okay? She was always complaining, and one day, for no reason at all, she calls the police on me, okay? She calls the police on me. They show up for no reason. I wasn't doing anything. No reason.
A little older. He's like...
No reason. And his point was, if I was a black man in this community, I would have assumed she's racist. And he says, I don't think there's just many racists. There's just a lot of assholes. And in other words, like, people are annoying and can be bad. And if you've been sold this idea that like it's all through like we're in a white supremacist society or in that stuff, you can easily misconstrue or perceive ill will towards you as being racially motivated when maybe it isn't. But having said that, look, we all know our own communities better than we know other people's communities. But I think that like it just because two things seem alike doesn't mean they're alike upon further evaluation. And I'm not trying to say different standards for us. I'm just saying different realities sometimes.
One more thing I'll say to Candace's credit is she didn't have to release the episode of having this, and to her credit, she did.
Yeah, unedited.
Which I think is cool and commendable.
Yeah.
And I hope she does more of these with other people who can have this conversation with her in a constructive way.
Yeah. And overall, the approach of engaging with this rather than not, or I don't know. It's hard to know where to draw those lines, and I get why people draw the line at not engaging with Candace Owens or not, and I have that line too, depending on the person and the individual. It's a case-by-case basis. And in this case, given we had a conversation before that I didn't think went well, it warranted a round two, and I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I had the discussion with Dave Smith. And a lot of people are like, some people reach out to me like, don't engage with him. He's self-hating Jew, that kind of thing. I'm like, no. I think if we just like use these broad blanket terms to describe everybody, it's very low resolution. I found that Dave is a knowledgeable and a formidable debating opponent and just draws the complete wrong conclusions about a lot of things. And is naive, dangerously naive to certain things. That doesn't make him. There's a difference between opponents and enemies. There's just a difference between your opponents and your enemies, and where you draw those lines is really hard. But the more speech, not less ethic, and the more speech, not less approach, I don't think does harm. Yeah. I think isolating ourselves and siloing ourselves off into our own little corners and then congratulating ourselves for calling out people we don't like I think it's probably less productive.
And to your credit, I think you were really successful in getting her to clarify her position
Mhm.
further, and like more conversations like that will get her to clarify further and further. And like, yeah, you may find out she's actually you actually have more in common with her than you might imagine.
Right.
You know.
All right. So we shall see what happens going forward. And yeah, I think we have to be mindful of how to properly react to things. And it doesn't mean we don't all agree, but how to react going forward. Ignorance, easier to fight than hate. So before things turn to hate, and before we jump to hate, one can personally feel a certain way, but still engage in hateful rhetoric that needs to be challenged. And I think we're all mature enough and big enough to be able to challenge it clearly, level-headedly, calmly, and civilly. And doing that is a Kiddush Hashem, no?
And it's Tikkun Olam, and it's tzedakah, and it's a mitzvah.
Isn't it? It can't. I say it can't do harm to show up and have a civil conversation. I would hope. I'm trying that approach.
Yeah.
And we shall see.
Yeah.
What goes from there?
Yeah. I'm proud of you. I think you did a good job.
This deserves a fingy. To many more. Jews love a good schmooze, huh? We like to schmooze, so let's keep schmoozing.
L'chaim.